Yanandra Shanmugam. So I'm here to talk about bioinformatics in microbiome research. Nowadays, we know that how our human being has been affected with so many diseases and all, and how we people are recovering so quickly from the diseases. So we have to know that apart from having a certain kind of genes which is helping us to survive, we have a certain microbial communities which is helping us to survive and to make our body functions perfectly okay. So before going for that, let's have a look that we have and different kinds of species from ranging from bacteria to and human beings. So where we have an various kinds of various numbers of genes. So this is the numbers of the genes which has been seen in different species, starting from bacterium to an human being. So if you consider a small bacterium, which is of an E. coli, which consists of only one chromosome, pseudochromosome, it's not an exact chromosome. So which consists of nearly 5,000 genes, and where we have an 4.1 million base pairs. As soon as if you're going to look into a human being, we have an 46 chromosomes, in which we have an 28 to 35,000 genes, and we have an nearly 3.1 billion base pairs. So these base pairs are nothing but we are calling it as of an ATGCs. So if you are going to count this ATGCs, can you consider that how much time it is going to take for counting this 3.1 billion? So it takes almost 94 years to count this base pairs in one particular DNA in one cell, even if you're going to count one base pair per second for 24 hours a day. So imagine that how huge the data which we are having. And same way, if you look into the numbers of this human genome projects, so we have in 46 chromosomes, which we are having in 28 to 35,000 genes, and the largest gene in a human is an dystrophin, which is of 2.4 million base pairs, and we have in 3.1 billion base pairs, and just in one cell. And now consider the human body is made up of nearly 75 to 100 trillion cells. So imagine that if you want to count all these cells, so this is the time which has been taking for to count your all the 100 trillion cells, 3.1 million years. So consider that how fast the Human Genome Project has completed, which has taken almost 13 years to give a rough draft of a human genome. So how this has been happened? So when we are having on this many of cells and this many of nucleotides, so within the short period, and apart from that, keeping the data aside, we are coming for another portion of our data like microbiota. So where we are going to see an collection of microbial communities which has been colonizing in particular habitat. And in the same way, we are having a microbiome. So the study of the collective genome of all these microbial cells in a particular habitat is called as of a microbiome. And if you are going to study what is the composition of microorganisms in a human being, that's called as of a human microbiome. So apart from and having those number of genes, if you look into the microbiome of a human being, we are saying that almost 90% of the human is made up of a microbiome. 90% of human is having a microbiome, and where we have almost greater than 10,000 species of microorganisms has been seen in a human body, and where we are having a genome of 22,000 genes. So just now you compare that, we have only 22,000 genes, and if you look into the microbial cells, we have 100 to 10 to 100 trillion cells. So it's almost 10x. And if you see into that, we have an common similarity between two human beings will be 99.9% similarity in genome. Whereas if you look into the microbiome of two individuals, it's almost 80 to 90% variation. So it's not about similarity I'm talking here. I'm talking about similarity in the genome. It says that 99.9% of human beings are same. Whereas if you compare the microbiome of two human individuals, it will be 80% variation. It means only 20% similarity will be seen in a microbiome of two individuals. So now you see that we have this many of genes in a human being of 22,000 genes, which is of 3.1 billion base pairs. And if you take a microbiome, the small bacteria, which is of 100 to 10 to 100 trillion cells, and each simple bacteria will have nearly 5,000 genes, and which is of 4.1 billion base pairs. So now we have 100 trillion bacterial cells. So we want to find out what are the functions of all this microbiome and all. So how it's possible to analyze all this data? And here comes the role of bioinformatics. So it's nothing but bioinformatics is using your computational power. We are going to analyze our biological data. So whatever the biological data, like if you want to analyze a human genome, if you want to analyze a human genes, we can analyze by using n fast rapid, simple like a calculator. If I'm asking you to calculate like 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 until 10, it takes 55. So those who are very quick in mathematics, they can just say that. In the same way, if you think that we are having a 3.1 billion base space, and if I want to count all this, how much time it's going to take? So in the same way, here we are going to use an computational power to calculate and to analyze the data very perfectly. Though we have an 1 to 2% of errors, still the data is perfectly okay from this bioinformatics. So that's the role of bioinformatics, which helps us to analyze the data. So now let's look into and microbiome, how human microbiome has been organized, and how we have to take care of our microbiome, and how the data can be analyzed by using our bioinformatics, and what are the tools which has been helping us. So before going further, the usual traditional way to understand the microbe is by using a microbiology study. So where we are going to culture and few bacterial cells, and we are going to analyze it. What is the role of this particular bacteria? This is the normal traditional method. So if you look into this traditional method, we have an basic technology called as often culture-based technologies, where we can culture only in less than 1% of microbes. So even if you're going to culture and microbes from any soil or from any habitat which you like, we can able to culture only less than 1%. So what about the remaining 99% of the bacteria which has been present there? So we want to identify what is the role of each and every bacteria and what they are doing there. So apart from going for an traditional method, we are going to introduce a new method called as often culture independent method. So here, without going for culturing, just we are going to use an advanced techniques like PCR techniques. So we are going to amplify the genes of an bacterial cells, and we are going to analyze what are the bacteria which has been present in our particular habitat. So if you look into this, in this case, we are going to introduce a new one called as often next generation sequencing technique, which is very fast in giving you loads of data, tons of data, so which can be analyzed by using our computers. So if you look into an microbiome, how we can study the microbiome, this can be categorized into different ways, like saying an metagenomics. So where we are going to study almost all the bacterial, archaea, fungi together in an habitat. And if you want to study only an bacterial culture, then it's called as of an microbiome. If you're going to study only an fungi, it's called as of an microbiology. So if you're going to study an viruses, it's called as of an viriobiome. So like that, we have a different categories, so in which we are going to consider as an metagenomics, where we are going to study both bacteria, archaea, and fungi. And we are going to use an technique called as of an whole genome shotgun sequencing. So this is the technique which helps us to analyze our microbiome. And if you look into this part, if you want to analyze the bacteria and archaea population, we are going to use a method called as of an 16S rRNA sequencing. So this is the method which helps us to identify what kind of bacteria are present or what kind of archaeal features population has been present in our microbiome. The next category is of an fungi, which is of an eukaryote. So where we are going to use an method called as of an 18S rRNA sequencing. So these are the two popular techniques which we are going to use to understand to study the microbiome of particular habitat. So next one, why we have to do this microbiome analysis? So this is the three common questions which helps us to analyze our microbiome. Who is there in my nature? So like if you're going to take a specific habitat which I'm going to analyze. So first question is we are going to analyze who is there in that particular habitat. So how many eukaryote species are present, and how many archaea are present, and how many bacteria are present, and what are the bacteria, to which family they belongs, to which kingdom, which phylum. So what are the things which we have been interested. And once we determine that who is there, next we are going to find out what are they doing there. So what is the role of each and every bacteria? So whether this bacteria is very essential for the survival of a human being, or to keep the human being in a healthy state or in a disease state. So that's what we are going to analyze here, what they are doing. And the next one is often how they are doing that. So here we are going to say that this class of bacteria is going to help me for this particular function. And here we are going to study the gene, which gene is essential from this particular bacteria. So which gene is essential to take care of this particular function. So first thing is we are going to study what kind of bacteria are present, archaea or fungi, which has been present in my community, and what they are actually doing, what's the role of each and every bacteria, and how this bacteria is doing that, and what's the gene which has been essential for making this bacteria essential, or which gene is helping the bacteria to become an virulent or pathogenic something if it is going to cause you a disease. So these are the three common questions which will be addressed when we are studying a microbiome. And this is the method so which we are going to follow. So like collecting and samples, we are going to collect and samples from from an habitat. So which gives you an bacteria or fungi or archaea from different classes will be identified. And once we are going for an 16S RNA or 18S RNA, which are the species which we are looking for. So we are going to use an 16S RNA sequencing. And once we are going for an 16S sequencing, 16S RNA sequencing. So this is the question which we are going to say that what are they doing and what are the bacteria which has been present and how they have been classified. So once we are going to classify that, that's called as of an taxonomic classification. So you're going to say that whether the bacteria belongs to a particular family, phyla, class, species. And the next one is of an population analysis. So where we are going to consider three major factors like alpha diversity, that is within that particular sample. So how many bacteria has been present, richness and diversity. And beta diversity, it means the comparison between the two samples, two different samples. This is within the sample. Alpha diversity means within the sample. Beta diversity means between the samples, and over or under representation. So which bacterial community is seen higher and which bacterial community is seen lower. So this is what we are going to analyze by using our 16S RNA sequencing. So until that until sample collection, performing on 16S RNA sequencing, that's fine. Once you do an 16S RNA sequencing, you will be receiving a lots of data, and these lots of data will be categorized into an taxonomic classification, and what are the further analysis we are going to do. This is the portion where our bioinformatics plays a major role. So now before going for that, let's have an overlook of how the human microbiome has been made up of. So what are the things which we should consider when we are studying a human microbiome? So it says that the total microbes and their genomes and how it has been interacting with the environment which has been surrounding. So that's about an human microbiome, and it's a prestigious project from NIH, and it's called as of an NIH Human Microbiome Project. So in this microbiome project, they have published that the gut microbiota of a human is very important, and they said that it's an other genome. It's our other second genome. So if you look into the human, if you consider in human body, we have one specific human genome. So which is of 22,000, which consists of 22,000 genes, and the second category is of the genome of our gut microbiota. So what are the bacteria which has been present inside us, and what's the genome, and what are the genes, and what are the functions they are performing. So it's very important, and even we say that it's a neglected part of a human body, but it's the one which is responsible for your stress, whatever the thing you are having. If you are saying that I'm very healthy, then your gut microbiota is very perfect. If you are saying that you are having some problems, if you're having some diseases, then it says that your gut microbiota is not in perfect shape. So it means that it's not in perfect composition. So taking care of our gut microbiota is very important to make a person healthy. So this is the goal of an human microbiome project. So, and this was the picture. This other genome. It has been published in a Nature journal, and so this is the statistics they have given, that what are the different kinds of bacteria which has been seen in at which part of the different parts of our stomach, and these are the various factors which influences our gut microbiota. So it depends upon the host genetic system, and the first one is of a geographical location, so where the human being. So why we are saying this geographical location is what kind of climatic conditions which we are having, what kind of food habits we are following, whether we are following a Western diet or we are following an normal diets like vegetables, and how far you are going to perform an exercises, and what is your stress level, and what are the antibiotics which you are taking, and what's your age, and gastric mobility, antimicrobial peptides, and gastric secretions, what kind of diet. And this is very important, that what is the mode of your delivery, whether you have been born in as of a natural delivery or it's as an C-section delivery. So this also decides your microbiome. So these are the various factors which influences our microbiome. So coming to here, it says that in stomach we have, these are the species which has been highly enriched: Lactobacillus, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, and Enterobacteriaceae, which is very essential to keep you fit in all the cases. And Duodenum, we are having an Illuminum. These are the bacteria which has been seen in higher in level. And in colon, this is the bacterial community which has been seen. So this is the outcome of our human microbiome project. Still it's going on. So it says that without microbiome we are nothing. So we need the bacterial cells to take care of our health. And this is a picture which shows you that based upon the microbiome which you are going to attain. So if you are going to attain and good bacterial cultures in your body, so you keep on staying healthy. And if the bad bacteria culture has been developing, so you will be you will be having a different kinds of and disease status. So diabetes, everything has been related with this. So this is an example of good bacteria which has been seen here, and so it's and helping your system to be okay. And these are the bad bacteria which starts cleaving your cells, which breaking the cells, and which is showing its activity. So these are the bacteria. Maybe almost all the microbiologists will be knowing that what is the role and what are the different kinds of diseases this bacteria has been performing, and what is the role of this particular beneficial bacterial cells. So it says that even if you're saying that I'm unhealthy, it says that your bacterial composition has changed some way. So we have to regain it so that we will get into an perfect healthy condition. So this is the role of microbiota. And even at the human in a human microbiome project, they have found out that what are the different bacteria which has been grown at which has been seen, and how the diversity has been increasing. So here you can see that the bacterial diversity has been increasing from birth to 2 to 3 years of an infant stage. And same way, inter-individual variability has been starting decreasing. So it says that when the child has been born, so they will be having only an Enterobacteriaceae. So the composition of Enterobacteriaceae will be high, and it's the only one. So as soon, that's why the graph is here. And when it comes to n 2 to 3 stages, it is having more number of bacterial cells, and the population of this Enterobacteriaceae seems to be very less when compared to the others. And here in this case, diversity, bacterial diversity is been increasing. So this color represents what are the bacteria from which family they belongs to. So you can see here that when the child has been born, it has been enriched with an Enterobacteriaceae. As soon as the child has been growing, so we can see the increase in the number of various families has been entering, like Lactobacillus, Clostridium, Lachnospiraceae. Next is of our Bifidobacteriaceae and Villonobacteria. So like this, it keeps on increasing. So the diversity increases because we need and more kind of functions. So which should keep you fit. So this is the outcome. So how the bacterial community has been changing as soon as we are growing. And in the same case, it says that when the child has been born, so it's not having any kind of when it's an unborn, it's like sterile. The body is often sterile. And when the baby has been born, so we have an different modes which will decide what kind of bacteria you can see here. So this the graph represents what is a community which has been seen at higher in level. So based upon 16S RNA sequencing, so based on breastfeed, so this is the composition, and based upon formula feed, so this is the composition. You can see here that the change in proteobacteria has been differing from breastfeed to and formula feeding individuals. And in formula feeding individuals, you can see that Firmicute level is very higher, whereas in breastfeed condition, the Firmicute level is okay. Whereas in solid state, we can see and one more group of bacteria has been increasing here. That's often bacteroids has been increasing, and other bacterials has been introduced. That more number of other bacteria has been introduced. When you come for an toddler stage, so here we are going to deal with an antibiotic treatments, malnutrition, and healthy condition. So if an healthy individual is, if an individual is healthy, this is the composition of bacteria. If it is an antibiotic treatment, so one specific group of bacteria will be lost. In a malnutrition, the proteobacteria influence will be more. And when you come for an adult stage, we are going to categorize as of an healthy and obese individuals. So where we can see that what is the role of each and every bacteria, and at the age, at an elderly ages, because of an poor genetic system and because of poor eating habits, the bacterial composition differs. So this is the various stages which says that from the day we born to the day we die, we are having a close association with bacteria, and this makes us to be unhealthy or unhealthy. And this is the statistics, and this is the output of our human microbiome. So where it says that, so in an oral microbiome, so this is the family of bacteria which has been represented here. So if you go for an oral microbiome, so we can predict what are the different kinds of diseases and which bacteria has been playing a role. And if you take an placenta microbiome, so what are the different diseases which we can predict. And if you take an vagina microbiome, so what are the different kinds of diseases. And skin microbiome, so these are the various kinds of diseases associated with your microbiome. And gut microbiome, so these are the various diseases which has been affected. So you say, for an example, if I'm going to take a specific obesity problem, so it says that in an obesity condition or in different conditions, we have an more number of bacteroids. So it clearly says that if you can reduce the number of bacteroids, there is your obesity problem can be solved. So this is the one which many of the people has been working on now. And this human, apart from this human microbiome, the gut microbiome has gained more attention, and many people are working on this gut microbiome because of due to this many diseases, and many diseases has been addressed by changing an gut microbiome. That's the reason why we are having products like prebiotics in the market. So this prebiotics helps in changing your gut microbiome, and it keeps us healthy. And so this is a picture which shows you that, so when we are using a non-Western diet and a Western diet, so in a Western diet, when you are using a Western diet, this gut microbiota, so when Western diet, so in this condition, we are having an gut microbiota. So you can see here in this gut microbiota, the decrease in bifidobacteria has been decreased, bacteroids has been decreased, Prevotella has been decreased, and Firmicutes has been increasing. So this is often side chain fatty acids. So because of this alteration in the side chain fatty acids has been decreasing. So butyrate, acetate, and propionate has been decreased, and which directly influences the mood of a person. So increase in anxiety or induce depression in the persons. So it says that this is a bacterial community which has been altered just because of this diet which we are taking. So this is the picture which explains you that, so if you have been following an Western diet, you will be ending up with only one specific type of bacterial community. Whereas if you're going to take in different kinds of vegetables, fruits, grains, nuts, so you will be enriched with a more diversity of a bacterial population, which keeps us very fit and healthy. So in the same way, if you start to follow an non-Western diets like taking in fruits, vegetables, milk, so your gut microbiota can see an increase in bifidobacteria, bacteroids, Prevotella, but the Firmicute level will be decreased. So as soon as this has been increasing, you can see that there is an increase in side chain fatty acids like butyrates, acetates, and propionate, and which improves the mood disorders. So it's very important that we should keep our gut microbiome very healthy. And if you look into the microbes, and we are not alone, and this picture says that the human being is surrounded with microbes at every place which we live in. And it says that we can even simply say that the microbiota in your intestine is like your ID card. So which keeps you, like, if you are fit, this is your microbiome, so you will be fit. If you are having this microbiome, you will be having this specific diseased state. So if you look into the functions of our gut bacteria, this microbiome composition, I'm not talking about single bacteria here, it's a microbiome. So it says that it's a combination of bacteria and archaea which has been present in that, and they're having a specific kind of functions here. So they are very helpful in your nervous system modification and breakdown of food components, pathogen resistance, protection against injuries, your dense bone dense bone density, and promotion of fat storage, promotion of angiogenesis, immune system stimulation, and biosynthesis of vitamins, and metabolism of medicines which we are going to take, antibiotic. So your gut bacteria is having very major role in maintaining your health. So it's very important that we should take care of our gut bacteria and microbiome. So this is how the data will be represented when you are going for an microbiome study. So by saying an human microbiome composition, here we are going to study an human microbiome. So where we are going to say that different microbiome colonizes different body area. So this is the graph, PCO graph, PCA graph, which explains you that what is the association between an bacterial community in different parts of our body. So if you're going to consider the oral community, oral microbiome, so we have a group of bacteria which has been associated here. If you look into gastrointestinal microbiome, so it has been classified separately. Urogenital classified separately, skin and nasal. You can see here there is a close association between skin and nasal, and few microbial communities. So it might be from some specific family of bacteria, so which will be shared. And you can see here the skin and nasal microbial community as having a large dispersal. So one kind of bacteria which has been seen in nasal has been seen in oral, skin, urogenital, and just a little composition in gastrointestinal. So like this, we can represent our bacterial community, so which has been having a close association with each other. And this is the picture which explains you that which phyla is higher or which is lower in your microbiome, in your community, which you are going to study. And it explains you that which bacterial family has been seen higher in nature. So this is how we are going to give an human microbiome composition. So apart from this human microbiome composition, we are not alone. So we have an surroundings environmental conditions. So here we are going to, we can perform and studies in plants. Even we can study and microbiome composition, how the microbiome composition has been helping the plant to survive against particular disease, or how the plant has been surviving within in a healthy condition and draft conditions, and what are the microbial cultures which has been helping to survive in draft conditions or to pest resistance, and what are the microbiome community in an animals or in a soil microbiome. So these are the different natures which we are going to, where we can apply our microbiome study and we can perform the analysis. So altogether, if you're going to study an microbiome of bacteria, fungi, everything, including everything, then it's called as of an metagenomics. So one can perform the study from different habitats like space, soil, water, or tissues, but overall the process will be same. Whatever, maybe that sample differs, but the downstream analysis and the process will be of same. So like collecting the samples, extracting the DNA, and sequencing the DNA. Once you get an DNA sequences, then we are going to perform an analysis, and it's called as of an bioinformatics analysis. So by using an various kinds of softwares or tools or pipelines, which we usually term it as of an pipeline. So we are going to use and different kinds of pipelines to analyze our data. So before going for that, let's have a small look at terms of metagenomics. What are the different terms which we are going to use? So we call an individual, if we have three different kinds of terms like individual, population, and community. So if you're going to deal with a specific bacteria, then it's called as of an individual. And if you're going to deal with a population, the bacteria belongs to an same family, or only bacterial population, then it's only bacterial community, then it's called as of a population. And if you're going to deal with all the microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, archaea, then it's called as of a community. So based upon that ecology, we are going to call it of an interspecies interaction can be studied in an ecology of community. In an ecology of population, we can study the birth, death, migration, and immigration of an particular bacteria. So whether this bacteria has increased or this has been decreased, so and so. And if it is of a single bacteria, then we are going to study the differential gene expression. And when compared to an genomics to a specific individual, we are going to map the genomes. What are the genes which has been present in that? And when coming to a population, we are going to study it as of an population genomics. It's called as simply we can call it as of an comparative genomics. We are going to compare the two genomes. And when we come for an metagenomics, here we are going to say that what are the genetic potentials of members of this particular community. So how this specific community has been helping the particular host or the environment to have its better activity. And when you come for the genetics, we are going to study what is the role of each and every gene. And here we are going to study the allele frequency. And here the community genetics means what is the relationship between each and every bacteria or every population, and which genes are very essential for having an interactions. So here even we have a term called as often quorum sensing, where how the two bacteria talks, and it's a separate topic where we can call it as often what's the language of bacteria, how two bacteria interact with each other. And so same terms like genomics, we are going to call it as often, if you're going to deal with a single organism, then it's called as often genomics. It's called as often genomics. And if it is of an metagenomics, if it's of a group of microorganisms, then it's called as of an metagenomics. And we are going to study this study can be performed by a technique called as of an RNA biology. So where we are going to use an rRNA sequencing, and it's often, as we know that RNA is a short segment, and the sequencing cost is of very less, but the significance of this RNA is it's very highly conserved, and it gives the difference. You can differentiate the species to species, and it gives you enough information from small variable regions. So if you look into your rRNA gene, so this rRNA gene will be having 9 variable regions. These are called as often hypervariable regions. So these hypervariable regions are very essential to when we are going for an sequencing of our particular bacterial community. So just we'll have a look on that. So we have two kinds of an bacterial population like prokaryotes, and microbial population like prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So in prokaryotes, we have 70S ribosomes, and in eukaryotes 80S ribosomes. The 70S ribosome is made up of 30S and 40S ribosomes, and in 80S it's often 40S and 60S. So now coming for your 16S rRNA, it's in part of 30S ribosome. And the main advantage of 16S rRNA is it can give you a bacterial taxonomy classification, and it's easily and rapidly sequenced, and it's having a 9 variable regions. So here you can see that V1, V2, V3, V4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So these 9 hypervariable regions are very essential for your species annotation and diversity analysis. And this 16S rRNA helps us for an phylogeny reconstruction. So it says that which two bacteria are closely associated with each other. So if you look into the sequencing technologies, what kind of sequencing technology which we can establish when we are going for an microbiome study. So we have 9 variable regions like V1 to V9, and so this is the region. So if you are going to use an Roche for P44, so we are going to use an variable regions like V1 or V3, or we can say that if you are interested in V1 and V3 region. So this says that if you can consider whatever the region which you want to amplify, it depends upon the aim of your project. So if you want to collect all the species, all the bacterial species, then it's suggestible that we should go for V3 and V4 regions. So if you want to specify only a specific group of bacteria, then we can go for V1 and V3 bacterial population. If you want to go for a specific bacterial population, again, we can go for V4 region. But if you are interested in finding out almost all the 99.99% of bacterial population from your habitat or from your sample, so then it's suggested that we should go for V3 to V3, V4 region. So if you are using an V1 and V3 region, so what kind of sequencing technology I should ask for? So then you should ask for Roche 454 sequencing mission. Or if you're going for V3, V4 region, then we should ask for Illumina MiSeq. So here PE stands for paid and sequencing. And V3, V5 regions, again Roche 454. And if you're going for only V4 regions, then we should use an HiSeq technology. And if you're going for V6 to V9 regions, then again we are going for Roche 454. And this is the length of that gene which will be amplified. When we are going to perform an amplification for this V3, V4 region, then your base pair size will be approximately 428 base pairs. And if you're going for full length of this V1 to V9, then we are going to use a method called as PacBio. So this is the technologies which we are going to use for making an 16S for extracting your microbial population. And this is the primers list, so which will be used for specific regions. So you can see here, this is 8F, the primer sequence. So it starts from here, and 149R reverse primer. So if you want to sequence the full length, so we are going to use an 8F primer and 1492 reverse primer, so that your full gene will be amplified. So this is the primers list which we can use for using N16S RNA like V3 and V4 regions. And next one is, once we get an rRNA genes, so we will be using this as often markers. So for if you are using an 16S rRNA, we can identify what are the bacterial and archaeal population. If you are using an 18S rRNA, then we are going to identify an eukaryotic population. So once we get that, we are going to classify the domain. We are going to assign a taxonomy for our species. So these are the levels of species. So from kingdom to species level. So kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So typically when we are using an 16S rRNA, we can say that at genus level, every bacteria can be specified. So every bacteria can be easily specified at genus level when we are going for 16S rRNA. Genus level is more than enough to say that how the bacterial population has been seen and what are the different bacterial communities. So if you want to say on species level, then we need to do more genetic study, and then we are going to use and more sequencing technologies, and then we are going to say that how closely the two species has been related with each other. So that's based on individual analysis, like taking two genus and then two genus 16S RNA, then we are going to develop a species. When we are going to perform a large scale of microbiome data, we are going to end up with genus level. So this is the basic workflow of our microbiome research. So here we are going to take a microbial community samples, and in which we are going to extract your DNA by using a 16S RNA base. So we are going to amplify the sequences by using a 16S RNA sequencing. And once we get an data, so from here our bioinformatics analysis starts. So once we get an 16S RNA sequencing, so we are going to gather that and we are going to group that. So which bacteria, which sequences are closely, which are similar to each other, and we are going to group them into one, and we are going to call it as of an OTU1, operational taxonomic unit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, like this, how many OTUs has been present. So these are the OTU, these are the sequences which belongs from one specific bacterial community, one specific bacteria. So once we get an OTU table, then we are going to analyze to find out which bacterial species, which bacterial genus to it belongs to. So by using a different kinds of databases like NCBI, Green Genes, RDP, and Silva database. These are the other databases which helps us to assign the taxonomy. So by similarity search like BLAST search, we are going to search against these databases, and we are going to find out what are the OTUs. So these OTUs will be plotted as often relative abundance. So it says that whose community, which bacterial community or which bacterial phylum family is higher in this specific community. So once it has been established, then we are going for OTU phylogenetic table, and we are going to say that whether we have any significant difference between each and everything. Then we are going for different kinds of analysis like variant sequences and SNP analysis. So this is one kind of an approach. The second kind of approach is extracting the DNA and going for a shotgun metagenomic approach, and then we are going to search against a database, and we are going to perform a comparative sequences to reference genome, and then we are going to decide to which phylogeny it belongs to and what are the variants and SNPs. And here we can perform and case studies like pathways, studying the function of what bacteria, and we are going to say that community function, what can the community do? That means the functions, what are the functions of each and every bacteria. So this is a basic workflow of our microbiome research. So once we have the specific data, so then we are going for a population analysis. So where we are going to study an alpha diversity, that's comparison within the sample, and next one is of an beta diversity, that's between the sample, and this can be represented by using in two different methods like PCA or PCO table or NMDS methods. So dimensionality reduction technique for visualization. So we'll have a look at here quickly. So if you are going to if you're going for an alpha diversity analysis, so we are going to compare the sample within the community. So let's take an example that I'm having in two communities. So community 1 and community 2. So here we are going to consider only community A for your alpha diversity analysis. If you're going to analyze the samples within this comparison, then it's called as of an alpha diversity. That is, I'm going to compare only community 1, or I'm going to study only community 2. Then it's called as an alpha diversity. If you're going to compare community 1 with community 2, then it becomes an beta diversity. So let's see here, in an alpha diversity, in one community, I am having 4 different kinds of species, right? So here also, if you take this specific community, community 2, here also I'm having 4 different species. But see here, in this case, the richness of the sample, that is, the diversity of these samples is 4. And evenness, how evenly they are distributed. You can see here, they have been evenly distributed like 25% each. So here the diversity is rich and evenness is also good. So this particular community is having more number of species and in equal distribution. That's called as of an alpha diversity. If you come for the alpha diversity of community 2, here we are going to say that the diversity, the richness is okay, that we are having on 4 species, but evenness, it's not an evenly distributed. The evenness is very less in this particular community because the species A is seen higher. Species A is seen higher, 80%, followed by D and B and C. So here the evenness is not perfect. Here the evenness is good. So that's the comparison. So when you go for an alpha diversity, we have to compare only community A, or we have to compare only community B, within the species. Whereas if you go for an beta diversity, so we are going to compare between 2 species, like sample A and sample B, and sample C and sample D, or we can compare with sample A with sample B, sample A with sample C, sample A with sample D. So like this, we have an various analysis. So where we can see and different kinds of strategies. So A and B have beta diversity. So A comparison with B and B comparison with C and C comparison with the D. So now if you look into this, this is how we are going to develop a table, and this table is called as a contingency table, and here we are going to represent the future. So first we are going to list out what are all the single bacteria which has been present in that. So here you can see here I'm having 3 green bugs, 2 purple bugs, 1 green, like this. So we are going to list out what are all the samples which we are having. So in sample A, so if you take sample A, how many green bugs I'm having? 3. So in sample B, we don't have any this kind of green bugs. In sample C, I'm having 3. 1, 2, 3. In sample D, I'm having 2. So like this, we are going to list out each and everything, and this is been called as of a future table or contingency table. So like this, we are going to list out each and every bacteria, and then we are going to make some calculations. Like these are the calculations which will be automatically performed by the software, which we are going to use for analysis. Just for your understanding, I'm saying that how this has been made. So here, once we get this, we are going to calculate what is the difference between sample A and sample B. So like x minus y whole square plus, we have that formula x minus x plus y, x square plus y square plus u square, finding out an root mean square deviation formula, x1 minus x2 whole square plus y1 minus y2 whole square plus z1 minus z2 whole square. Same way. So how many samples are you having? You can extend it, and we are going to plot that, and we are going to study the difference between distance between each and every community and how far they have been closely associated with each other. So this is how we are going to develop a feature table, and this is how your PCO plot looks like. So if you can remember this, we have seen the similar picture here. So this is how the community has been made. So the specific PCO community. So like that, each and every species will be calculated, and this is of our beta diversity. So even if your number of samples has been increasing, the formula goes on increasing, and we are going to get the data. So that's of our community structure, and this is an overall picture of our analysis. So here we are going to take an 16S RNA amplicon based metagenome samples. So the sequences will be extracted and purified, and we are going to use an 16S RNA technology, and then we are going to use an taxonomic classification by using different methods, and we are going to plot an relative abundance of our microbiome data, and directly from 16S RNA sequencing we are going to detect an OTUs, and we are going to compare we are going to refer and we are going to assign the taxonomy by using and different kinds of and databases, and then we are going to plot and relative abundance. Either this way we can go or this way we can go. So, but common is we have to end up with an relative abundance and taxonomy. And if you look here, once we get an OTU table, we are going to find out what are the functions of each and every bacteria which has been present by using in different kinds of in software, different types of in tools like Picrest, TaxForFun, Vicodac. So this is the one which helps us to find out what is the metabolic role or what is the functions of each and every bacteria, and we are going to represent the data in a heat map format. So this is the overall techniques which we are performing in an bioinformatics, and these are the crucial steps which says that how your data looks like and what is the microbial composition. And here is an overall simple picture which says that how we are going to perform an human microbiome study by using an bioinformatics tool. So here, an healthy individual in a healthy condition, we are going to extract for the microbiome by using an high throughput sequencing technologies. We are going to analyze the data, and we are going to say that we are going to construct an systems biology, like saying which bacteria is very essential and which has been very crucial for maintaining in healthy condition. And now here we are going to take an person from a different condition like cancer condition, and we are going to study the microbiome of that specific individual in the same way. And we are going to compare and we are going to say that, okay, these are the bacterial community which has been very less, which has been decreased or which has been increased when a person is in a disease condition. So accordingly, we are going to say that, okay, if you are going to introduce in the healthy condition, these are the group, this specific group of bacteria are seen higher, and in disease condition, this specific group of bacteria are seen lower in condition. So how to improve that? So either by improving the diet, which can increase the content of the specific bacterial population, or by using an bacteriophages, or by using an probiotics, prebiotics, or antibiotics. So we are going to give an potential medicines or the probiotics, and we can bring back an person into an healthy condition. So this is how the bioinformatics has been helping us to perform an microbiome study. And this is another example, so which can help you to analyze and different disease conditions. So this is a patient with atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, and an healthy control. This is a study which has been published in Nature Reviews. So in this case, they have taken and 187 individuals, healthy individuals, and patients with ASCVD, atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease. They have performed a shotgun sequencing to have an metagenome data, and here same wise here, and they have performed and what are the role of each and every bacteria, and they specify that what is the community structure in the same way, and they have built an pathway enriched enhancements. Based on this, they have said that this is the microbial community, the microbiome of ASCVD. So, and which pathways has been enriched. So based on this, one can divide that what are the microbiome community which has been helping. See here, cirrhosis microbiome. So this microbiome, which microbiome is playing a role in cirrhosis and what's its functional role. So obesity microbiome, which microbiome is being seen for obesity responsible, and which has been responsible for type 2 diabetes mellitus, which is responsible for rheumatoid arthritis. So like that, each and every microbiome from different disease conditions has been taken, and they have been compared with the phylogenetic, with their functional analysis. So once the functional analysis has been done, we can say that, okay, these are the microbiome which has been seen in this specific disease condition. So we can increase this particular group of bacteria, or we can decrease this specific group of bacteria. So this is how the microbiome analysis has been performed by using our bioinformatics. So this is a picture which helps us to how the prebiotics, or how we can restore the functions of an healthy individual, of a diseased individual. So see here, this is the microbial community which has been taken from a healthy individual. So it says that healthy microbiome. So when we have and different kinds of pathogen infections or environmental factors, or which helps us to which triggers and disease in an individual, if you look into this, the population of this bacterial community will be increased. So which brings an individual to a diseased condition. You can see here there is no orange bacteria seen here, but here the orange bacteria has been increased and the pink bacteria has been reduced. So now you can see here that this is the diseased microbiome. The condition, the human with an disease state will be having this kind of microbial community. So how I can restore back is by using an drugs, or by using an prebiotics, So where we are going to make your microbial community, which is very essential. This is the essential microbial population. So this essential microbial population will be introduced as often drugs so that we can re-establish an healthy microbiome. So this is the advantage of studying a microbiome of a specific individual, and that's the goal of our NIH project, human microbiome project. So this is the way, and these are the different sources how an healthy uh, people how an a person can be unhealthy by using a different postbiotics, probiotics, and prebiotics. And now we are having a method called as, it's called as often fecal microbiota transplantation. So that's a technique which has been established recently. So there they're taking an stool samples from an healthy individual, and they're extracting a microbial population which has been present in that, and those microbial population has been given as often capsules to an diseased people for improving the diversity. That's called as often fecal microbiota transplantation. So many recent studies has been published on this fecal microbiota transplantation. So this is how an individual healthy microbiome can be regained by using a different kinds of probiotics, prebiotics, or postbiotics. And this is what till now we have known about an human microbiome. So we have known that what we have known is 25 phyla and more than 2000 genera has been seen, 5000 species has been detected. So nearly 80% of metagenome are mappability, and we have 316 million genes. So this is what we have known, and still which has been not known is they have been detecting undetected or unknown bacteria has been seen. So that's of like 1 or 2% of bacteria has not been detected. And what are all the hidden taxons and strain level diversities which we have seen? That's 20% of sequences will always go as of invest. Maybe it's an artifact or something. So that's main thing which everyone has been performing and research on this. So 20% of sequence not matching to the microbial genomes, and functions are unknown. So nearly 40% of genes are unknown. So this is all about our human microbiome and the how bioinformatics is helping us to study an human microbiome. And with this, I would like to finish the session by saying that we cannot live without a microbiome, and each and every individual's microbiome is unique like of our DNA, fingerprints, like of our fingerprints. Each and every individual is unique in their microbiome community. Thank you. Thank you one and all.
To all, and I thank all of you for giving me this wonderful opportunity to share some of my knowledge with you. Even though I'm neither a biologist nor a full-fledged botanist, even there are more things to learn. But I want to share a little knowledge what I'm having in this regard. And in this pandemic situation, actually, I don't want to bore you with tough research and all those things. And I just want to make you remember what you studied in your lower class, and even about the climate and all, and how that climate which impacts over the biomes and all. Even I came to know that there are few non-science faculties also available in this group. So I would like to make a presentation which could be interesting to all of us, not only the botanists or even bioscience faculty. Any other faculty should enjoy this topic. So that is why I have selected this topic. Today I'm going to present a topic called climate, biomes, and India. See, biomes, actually, this is the main core of the topic. Biomes is nothing but it is group of plants and animals that share a common environment. And when we talk about the environment, actually we are speaking about the climate. So the climates which determine what type of vegetation should be there around the world. And coming to my last part of this presentation, I'm going to talk a few things about India and its biomes also. So my lecture would flow this way. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Dr. S. V. Rajesh, Assistant Professor of Botany from Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda College, Mylapore, Chennai. So as we all know that in the solar system, so far we are the only living planet, that is Earth, which is living because of its climate. are moving in a speed of 1.3 million kilometers per hour. We are revolving around the sun. So this living, that nature of living, what it made the earth to become, origination of life and all things. And there are so many theories which have been proposed to explain the origin of species and all. And I don't want to bore you with those things. Coming to the main point, the climate. This is a key factor which determines or which induced the life, as well as it is giving. It is the reason why we are having different type of vegetation and all. And explaining about the climate. Just a minute. So explaining about the climate, what is a climate? The climate, it is a long-term weather pattern of an area. Long-term in the sense it is for about 30 years. So the 30 years of weather pattern of an area is what called a climate. And when you want to explain what is the weather, it is the day-to-day state of an atmosphere. So today, what is the weather? That means whether it is sunny or windy, whatever it may be. That is the today's state of atmosphere. But when we talk about climate, it is the overall average of a long period of time for about 30 years. And what makes this climate? And we have different type of climates like summer, winter, autumn and all. So what makes this climate? How the climates are formed? When we see that thing, there are a lot of factors which involve in the formation of climate, even though there are few important things that we have to discuss. And I am talking about those things only today. So the first thing is obliquity, that is axial tilt. So when we draw a line between the North Pole and South Pole, that is, imagine in a line between the North Pole and South Pole, where the Earth which rotates around. So this is what called an axial line, and this axial line is not straight. It is tilted towards somewhat 23.5 degrees. That is called obliquity, or otherwise called axial tilt. And the second thing is precision. The precision is the change in the rotation of orientation of the rotating axis, that is wobbling. During its rotation, the Earth is not rotating smooth. It wobbles. So that is what called precision. And the third point is insolation. That is the amount of sunlight and temperature in the form of radiant energy what we are receiving per a unit of area at a defined time, what is called insolation. So these are all the three main things in addition to the other important factors which determine the climate. Now let us see how it determines. See, as I told you, that Earth is tilted in an angle of 23.4 degrees. So that the actual equator, which is also shifted, and what we call as a celestial equator. So what happens during this, due to this shift? Actually, due to this shift, we are not receiving the light throughout the Earth. We are not receiving the light in the same way. And during its revolving around, so the rotation is the movement of Earth which revolves itself. That takes 1 day, isn't it? Then the another thing is what called revolving. Revolving is the rotation around the sun. So that takes 1 year, isn't it? So during its revolving around the sun, actually the Earth, which is not receiving light throughout the year. So due to this, only we are getting different type of climates and all. And even not all the part of the Earth which receives same amount of light. And actually what happened is from the equator, the movement of sun, actually the Earth is moving, but it seems like the movement of sun takes place across the equatorial plane. And it goes to the upper hemisphere, that is above the equatorial plane, up to 23.5 degrees north, as well as below the equatorial plane, that is 23.5 degrees south also. So this plane, the plane between 23.5 south and 23.5 north, is what called a tropical zone. Which this zone which receives maximum amount of sunlight throughout the year. And what happened to the other regions? So apart from this tropic, I mean, we call it the 23.5 degree north is what called the Tropic of Cancer, and 23.5 degrees south is what called the Tropic of Capricorn. And in between that, we have a tropical zone. And the country which lies in those zones are called a tropical country. And on both sides of the tropical zone, we have temperate zone up to 66.5 degrees south and 66.5 degrees north. That is what called a Antarctic Circle and Arctic Circle. So this zone between the 23.5 degrees to 66.5 degrees is what called a temperate zone. And this zone gets different amount of sunlight. So now let us see how it goes. See, usually in our Hinduism, we say that Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, that is the movement of sun or the movement of earth, isn't it? So Uttarayana, Uttara which stands for north, and Ayana which means the movement. So during this Uttarayana, that is the period between June to December, what happens? The earth which starts move towards the north. So that is what called Uttarayana. And during this Uttarayana, so for example, if the Uttarayana starts by June 22nd, the sun actually when we on the earth, it looks like the sun is moving towards the Tropic of Capricorn. So it seems that during the period of Uttarayana, the sun it starts to move from the Tropic of Cancer to Tropic of Capricorn. And during that period, around the March 21st, it used to cross the equatorial plane, and we call it equinox. And the actual period when it starts from the Tropic of Cancer is what called summer solstice. Actually, the solstice is a Greek word. It is derived from a Greek word which means sol, which means sun, and sistre, that means standstill. So during around that is around the June 22nd at the Tropic of Cancer, the sun stands still, and afterwards, right from the next day, it starts moving towards the Tropic of Capricorn. And during its movement, when it comes to equatorial plane, that is around March 21st, we get equinox. Equinox, EP refers to equal and nox refers to night. So this is a day where we get equal amount of day and night, that is 12 hours of light and 12 hours of night period. And again, it passes towards the polar region, that is the southern region, and it reaches the Tropic of Capricorn, that is December 21st. Again, we get winter solstice, and again that Dakshinayana takes place. Dakshina, that refers to this movement again. So the Dakshinayana takes place from December 21st to June 21st. Again, in the June 21st, it reaches the Tropic of Cancer. And during that time, by September 21st, it reaches the equatorial plane again. So where we get autumn equinox, that again, so 12 hours of light and 12 hours of day period. So twice in a year, we get the equal period, that is equinox. And once we get summer solstice, and once we get winter solstice. So this is what happening. So now coming to the point, how this movement of earth or the movement of sun, which makes a climate. So when you see this, so this is the actual movement, some diagrammatic explanation. Actually, the sun is not moving, only the earth it tilts towards the sun. So that is why we are getting different types of climates. And this in this picture, you can see that it is taken from a standstill camera, focusing at a particular angle throughout the year. And every day, it is recording the rising of sun at a particular time, or the position of sun at a particular time. So as we say that the sun rises in the east, not exact at the same degree, but every day it used to change because of the movement of earth around the as it is tilted and as it is moving around the sun. Actually, the position will changes. So now coming to the point, how that position of sun over the earth which makes climates. So for example, when we start with June 21st, that is summer solstice. And during this summer solstice, we can see that the sun is found at the northern hemisphere. so that the northern hemisphere, which receives more amount of light, and coming to the south, which receives very less amount of light and heat. So that it is summer in the northern hemisphere, whereas it is winter in the southern hemisphere. And coming to the winter solstice, that is around December 21st or 22nd. Actually, it is not the same day. Every year we get summer solstice or winter solstice, because there is a change, about 50 odd seconds every year to actual precision. So the date, it is not same every year. It used to change. So in the thing that is December 21st, it is winter solstice. Southern hemisphere, I mean, the sun is above the southern hemisphere, so which receives more amount of light and heat, and it is summer here, whereas here it is winter. That is in the north hemisphere, it is winter. And coming to the equinox, the sun is above the equatorial plane, so that both the things, that is both the hemisphere, which receives almost equal amount of light, but the other factors which determine it is spring and autumn. So this is how we get different type of climates over the earth, and this will explain you how that different portion, due to the actual tilt, different portion of earth which receives different amount of light and heat. The next thing is insolation. See, insolation, it is nothing but, as I told you earlier, it is the amount of radiant energy what we are receiving from the sun at a unit of area, at a unit of time, per unit of time, what is called insolation. So when the sun is directly over the head, that is what called as the zenith, at its maximum height. When it is over the head, for example, during the summer, in the northern hemisphere, we have the sun at the zenith, so that we get maximum amount of light and heat. And when it comes to the horizon, that is during the winter solstice, the rise of sun is found only at the horizon, not at the zenith, for that northern hemisphere. So which receives very less amount of light and heat. So the insolation is also an important factor which tells how that how much light that we are receiving. And there is another thing, that is the distance between the earth and sun. Usually, even before, I thought that in my lower class, while I'm studying my lower class, I thought that we all know that the earth is rotating around the sun. It is revolving around the sun in elliptical pathway. I thought that when the earth which comes closer to the sun, we get more amount of heat and light. That is why we are facing very hot temperature during the summer. I thought that the closest distance is what called as summer, but it is not so. Actually, when we see the path of the earth which is revolving around the sun, we call it aphelion and perihelion. The aphelion is the longest distance, that is the greatest distance, and perihelion is the shortest distance. And it is about 5 million kilometers difference. And this 5 million kilometers difference, that makes only 7% of the light and heat energy what we are receiving. For example, in the aphelion, we are getting 30 degrees Celsius. In perihelion, we get only for 7% to 30 degrees Celsius. It is about 2%, I mean 2 degrees or something. So it will be increased to just 2 degrees. So that 2 degrees will not make much difference, isn't it? So actually, the summer, it is not because of the distance between the sun and earth, and it is because of the tilt of the earth as well as the movement of earth towards the sun. That is the summer solstice and winter solstice that I explained earlier. And now we are coming to another important factor, that is global atmospheric circulation and precipitation. This global atmospheric circulation is nothing but it is the movement of air or the flow of air. As we know that the flow of air is not constant, even though we have some constant circulation of air around the global regions. And due to this, only we are getting rainfall and snowfall on that. So in every hemisphere, both in northern and southern hemisphere, we have three different type of cells called Hartley cell, and three different types called Hartley cell, parallel cell, and polar cell. There are three different type of circulation, and this is a very important actually thing to know when we come to the Hartley cell. first let me explain about the Hartley cell around the equatorial plane. I already told you that the equatorial plane which receives more amount of light and heat throughout the year. So this is a very hot place, the equatorial plane. And what happens when when it receives more amount of light and heat, the air gets more heated. When it becomes heated, then it expands and become lighter. So the lighter air which comes to float and which rises from the earth and reaches the sky. And due to the Coriolis effect, between, I mean, it gets circulated within the hemispheres. And in the southern hemisphere, it goes in clockwise direction. The northern hemisphere, it goes in anti-clockwise direction. So usually the air which flows towards the polar region in both hemisphere, we can say that it is moving toward the polar region. So the equatorial plane, from the equatorial plane, the air which is rising, which used to carry the moisture, so that along with the air, the moisture also travels towards the polar region. And by the way, when it moving towards the polar region, around 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south, the air gets condensed. Before reaching that, the air gets condensed, and due to the condensation, it pour in the form of a rain. So that these places, tropical places which receives more amount of rain. See, please note down, this is a very important thing. When it move across the tropical region, it pours and we receive more amount of rainfall. Okay, so when it comes to 30 degree, again it becomes so heavier and it comes to the earth. Again, that in the ground, again it is driven towards the equatorial region and it come back because of the vacuum and all created by the air. So there will be a constant flow, there will be a constant circulation. So because of that, again it circulated back to the equatorial plane, and the dry air which used to come to the equatorial plane, again it get heated along with the moisture, it moved toward the polar region. So this is how it operates. This is one cycle, what is called Hartley cycle. And there is another circulation of air found on both the hemisphere, what is called the Farrell cell. The Farrell cell, which starts with the 60 degree north as well as 60 degrees south. Actually, the first cycle, that is Hartley cell, which started from the equatorial plane, but the second cycle which started from the 60 degrees north, and it rotates towards the equatorial plane. And some part of the air which rotates here this way, that is towards the equatorial plane, and part of them which moves towards the polar region. And this is a weaker cell comparing to the polar cell as well as the Hartley cell. This is a weaker cell which consists of very dry air. Okay, so this is the second cell, what called Farrell cell. The third one is polar cell. That is the polar cell where within the polar region there is a circulation of air. Because of this circulation only, it receives some amount of air from the Farrell cell also. That is the heat which is passed from the equatorial plane, which passes through the temperate region and finally reaches the polar region also. So the main thing, not only moisture as well as the heat energy is also distributed throughout the earth because of three different cells, that is Hartley cell, Farrell cell, and polar cell. So now I hope you understood how these cells which operates, or what is the importance of these cells in precipitation and all. And I would like to tell you some interesting terminologies in this aspect also. So here you can see that doldrums. Doldrum is a place that is, it is about 10 degrees north and south from the equatorial plane, what is called a doldrum. That latitude is what called the doldrums. See, in that doldrums, we have calm air. As the air is raised from the 0 degrees and it passes towards the polar region, this region, which gets only the surface air, which is floating from 30 degrees of north or 30 degrees of south, that we call as a trade wind. And this 10 degree in that 10 degree latitude, the atmosphere is very calm. So when the ship in olden days, when they use the wind energy for sailing, when the ship comes to this 10 degrees, usually where we get stagnant air, that is the flow of air will be very calm, so that the movement of ship will be delayed. I mean, the speed of the ship will be reduced because of the stagnant air, and this is what they call doldrums. And another important terminology, that is horse latitude. This is another interesting terminology that I came to know. See, this is about 35 degrees, between 30 to 35 degrees latitude. When the wind flows towards the earth and it starts moving toward the equatorial plane, that is both hot air as well as in the surface we get moist air, as well as we get some calm air. So all these airs mix together and make the climate little worse. And even here also we get a become the wind condition, stagnant wind condition, and the OAH which gets delayed in this latitude also. So when the thing get, I mean when the things get delayed, the OAH get delayed, the ship which used to get very less amount of, I mean they get depleted with the water and all other supplies. So what they do is in the earlier days they used to throw their dead horses overboard so that they can save some amount of water. So that is why it is called the harsh latitude. Even some theories say that the ship is harsh because of the stagnant air. It gets harsh, so that that is it becomes stagnant or becomes slow down. So that is why it is called harsh latitude. So there are so many things to explain about this harsh latitude. However, it is interesting, I hope. So there are different types of, what we understood from this thing is there are different type of, three different types of circulation of air available, and which helps us to get rain and all. Even the monsoon also, which is part of this thing. And I would like to give you an interesting video of Coriolis effect. Excuse me. Can't play that video, please excuse me. So that will tell you actually how that Coriolis effect, which involves, actually it's a small demonstration, explains the Coriolis effect. Actually the vortex, when the water pours through the pore, the vortex is created. That explains how that it rotates in the northern hemisphere. In Uganda, some part of Uganda, we have that equatorial plane which passes through, and on both sides of the equatorial plane we have southern and northern hemisphere where it is demonstrated. So all of you, I request all of you to please go to YouTube later and watch that video, Coriolis effect, and you can see that thing. So now coming to the next part, that is biomes. So as I told you earlier, the biome is the community of plants and animals which share a common environment that they exist. That is pertaining to a particular environmental condition or climatic condition. There are few adaptations which found in both plants and animals where they live in. So this is what called a biome. So biome is an area in which both plants and animals have some common characteristics towards the climatic condition. So each biome is characterized by its own climatic condition, or in other words, we can say that the climatic condition which varies the biomes. Okay. So there are two major biomes. There are different type of classifications available, but for understanding, I am taking a simple classification in which we can divide the biomes into two major classes, that is aquatic biome and terrestrial biome. The aquatic biome, that refers to the water biome, both freshwater and marine water comes under the aquatic biome. And coming to the terrestrial biome, we have Arctic and subarctic, temperate and tropical biomes. So in the case of Arctic and subarctic biomes, we have two different type of vegetation called tundra and boreal vegetation. See, the tundra vegetation, tundra is nothing but very cold climates, freezing climates, what is called the tundra, where we get some vegetation. Then the boreal climate, that is boreal forest, it is otherwise called a coniferous forest or taiga. In other words, that is also a typical vegetation that we can found in the Arctic and subarctic regions. And coming to the tundra, we can divide them into three major classes, that is Arctic tundra, then Alpine tundra, then Antarctic tundra. Arctic tundra is found at the Arctic region. Antarctic tundra is found at the Antarctic region, which has very less amount of vegetation. And Alpine tundra, which is found all over the world at high altitudes. That is what called Alpine tundra, like Himalayan, where we get alpine tundra, where we get cold temperature or freezing temperature because of the high altitude. That is what called alpine tundra. Next major class is temperate zones or temperate vegetation. In the temperate, again, we have forest, grassland, chaparral, deserts, deserts and all. So the chaparral, that is nothing but the scrub forest. Chaparral is nothing but it is a scrub forest. Okay. So again, the forest, we divide them. We can divide them into rainforest or evergreen forest and deciduous forest. The deciduous forest, which loses their leaves at the dry season as adaptation to avoid the avoid that loss of water. And coming to the tropical zone, again we have in the tropical zone also we have forest, grassland, and desert. In the forest region, again the forest biome is again divided into rain or evergreen forest and deciduous forest. In the grassland also we have different types of grasslands like prairies, meadows, steppe, and savanna. Actually, the prairies is nothing but the grassland with flowering plants. Not only the grass, along with that, there are some flowering plants also available. Meadow is hygrophilous grasses found, that is moist loving grasses found there. Hygrophilous or tropophilous grasses found there. And in the steppe, we have xerophilous grasses. And savanna, it is xerophilous grasses with isolated trees, that sparsely present trees are also available. So we have different type of grassland also. And this slide, which explains how different type of biomes are present throughout the world. Right from the equator, around the equator, we have tropical wet forest, that is tropical rainforest, and which is followed by dry forest, that is moving towards the polar region, we come to dry forest. Then desert, I hope you remember that place, that is about 30 latitudes, where we get only dry air. So the precipitation is very less, the rainfall is very less, so it becomes very arid and it becomes a desert area. And crossing that desert area, we get grasslands or prairies or even different type of grasslands, and deciduous temperate forest or temperate deciduous forest. And we come to the end of subtropical regions, that is boreal forest, that is subtundra area. And coming to the polar region, we get Arctic tundra regions. So from the equator throughout the world, we can see a common pattern in the distribution of different type of biomes that we can see here. So this is the world map with biomes. So here you can see that this is equatorial plain. From the equatorial plain, there are different type of vegetation or biomes which is present, and you can see a small similar pattern on distribution on both sides, that is on the northern and southern hemisphere somewhat. And here we come to tundra region, and below the tundra region we have boreal forest. And at the Mediterranean, around the Mediterranean Sea, here it is Mediterranean Sea. Around the Mediterranean Sea, we have typical climatic condition, and that we call chaparral or scrub forest. Okay, so this is how different biomes are distributed throughout the world. And now you can correlate that I told you earlier, that is the formation of climate or distribution of climate across the world, as well as now you can correlate how different biomes are placed on the earth pertaining to the particular climate. So in the equatorial plain, so we are in the tropical region. For example, if you take India, we are in a tropical region where we get more amount of light, as well as we get more amount of rain. Now it is changing because of some climatic condition now. I mean, the climate is changing because of so many factors, but generally we get more amount of precipitation as well as light. So here in these places around the equator, you can see evergreen forest and all. Likewise, throughout the world, we are getting different type of biomes and all. So you can see the picture here, and you can get an idea also. Now I made a small comparison of few topics between the biomes, how they are differing, or we can see a small comparison here. So in the case of tropical rainforest, it is about 10 degrees north as well as in the 10 degrees south between from the equatorial plane. The temperature is around 20 to 34 degrees Celsius, and the annual rainfall. So here we are getting maximum annual rainfall, that is 135 to 250 centimeters per year. And there is no seasons, as we get throughout the year, we get in the equatorial plane, we have throughout the year we get more amount of sunlight and heat. There is no big seasons like summer, winter and all, but we have dry and wet seasons that occurs. And another important thing is here the soil is very poor because of the continuous rain and all. It is leaching of minerals and all takes place. But even though it is rich in nutrients, I mean the plants get more nutrients due to the weathering and all, weathering of leaves and all. Even though the soil is poor, it gets nutrients circulated every fall of leaf and other things. And coming to the density of vegetation, it is very high, and the diversity of vegetation is also high. We get different kinds of plants and animals. Okay, then the tree population, which is very denser, and grasses are very sparse in this region. And the type of vegetation, very large trees, shrubs, evergreen plants that we can see these throughout these tropical rainforests. And coming to the savanna, I told you that savanna is a type of grassland where we get grasses, different type of grasses, and sparsely arranged trees. It is between 15 degrees to 30 degrees, both north and south. The temperature is about 24 to 29. So you can see there is a decline when we go towards the polar region. So I don't want to bore you with reading all these things, but I want to tell you the pattern, how it goes. So when we go through this, this is towards the equatorial plane, and we go towards the tropical region. I already told you that tundra, it is near the polar region. So there is a decline in the temperature that available. So based on the temperature as well as the annual rainfall, there are different types of vegetations which are available. These are the main factors. Not only these factors, even some other factors also influence, but these are the main factors which influence the formation of biomes over on the earth. And I have given the type of plants available, and the soil density of plants and all. Even when we come to the tropical deserts, we get very low density of plants and animals, and the diversity is also moderate, not as rich as the tropical forest. Trees are very sparse and grasses also very sparse, and we get only xerophytic plants, that is the plant which needs very less amount of water, that is xerophytic plants, and succulents that can store. Succulents are fleshy plants that can store, like cactus, which store some amount of water. So these are all called succulents. So we get these type of plants. So you can see that even when you take the animals also, the animals which should adapt to the particular environment, only they can live in that area. So coming to the chaparrals, I told you that it was around the diversity is moderate. We get small trees and shrubs. Then temperate grasslands. It is having variety of grasses, and here trees are completely absent. Then temperate forest, where we get different type of trees, but not as rich as the tropical rainforest. Then coming to the another thing is boreal forest. Then finally we come to tundra, where we get very low density of plants and animals available. The diversity is also very low. The trees are almost absent, and the grasses are very moderate, that is medium, not so rich. So we get some plants, ground dwelling plants like mosses and perennials that can adapt to even worse situation. The perennials that can live throughout the year. The perennials, you know that it lives for long period of time because of the underground storage part that sprouts, okay, in good condition. So this is a small comparison that will give you an idea about how different biomes are arranged. And coming to the final part of my presentation, that is climate and biomes of India. See, actually, we have very rich source of, we have very rich resources. We have four borders. They are also very much different. Okay, see, when you take the Himalayas on the north, it is the high mountain, which hold the temperature. And coming to the south, it's a peninsular area. Three sides are surrounded by water. That is the Kanyakumari. That is a peninsular area. And going to the east, we have high mountains with high rainfalls. Then coming to the west, again we have deserts and all. So we have different type of borders with different type of biomes also. And coming to the Andaman Nicobar Island, this is a typical island with a very rich resources as well as the biomes. And as I told you earlier, the climate in Himalaya is colder, and coming to the peninsula, again the climate, the cold, I mean, it becomes somewhat hotter. And on both sides, east and west, we get different types of climates and all. And we get rain during the monsoons, like the northeast monsoon between October and November, dry winds from the north between December and February, and from March to May, the climate is dry and hot. So coming to the richness of plants, I don't want to bore you with all the list of plants available. Just to tell you an idea about what are the number of plants available. So there are 250,000 species available in the whole world. Among that, 45,000 of plant species are found in India. That is about the 33% of the total world population. And 15% are flowering plants. Among the 45,000, 15,000 are flowering plants. It is about 6% each. Okay, and we have endemic species also in throughout the world, not only in Northeast, throughout the world, especially in Western Ghats. Also, we can see Western Ghats is a very important feature of our India. So it is the hotspots. Actually, there are two hotspots. One is Eastern Himalayas and Western Ghats. Western Ghats, which is found in the South India. So it is we have very endemic species, and even in Andaman Nicobar Island also there are 200 endemic species available. So coming to the number of plant species, angiosperms, that is flowering plants, it is 15,000. Gymnosperms, that is non-flowering plants, but trees like cycas we used to grow in our garden, that is about 64 in numbers. Pteridophytes 1022, bryophytes, algae, fungi, bacteria and lichen. So there are different number of plant species available. Okay. And coming to the animals, there are 11,96,903 total number of animals for species found, of which 7% are found in India. That is 86,874, which is somewhat higher. Only 6% of the world plants available here, but here in animals, coming to the animals, it is 7%. So in the case of animals, mammals, 390 different types of mammals and different numbers of birds, reptiles, amphibians and fishes are available. And I have given some endangered lists also. So this is a piteous thing. Now most of them are become endangered. They are getting red listed due to the mismanagement and over exploitation also. And coming to the biogeographical zones, there are 10 biotic provinces or biogeographical zones available, like Trans Himalaya, Northern Himalaya, then in the peninsular area we have Deccan. So there are islands of Andaman and Nicobar, something like that. So we have 10 different biogeographical zones, and each zone is having a peculiar climate and different kinds of plants available in it. So coming to the Western Ghats, I just want to tell you some facts about the Western Ghats. The total length is about 1,600 kilometers, right from Kanyakumari to Gujarat. It extends up to Gujarat. So it is crossing the different states. The total length is about 1,600 kilometers. The number of dams are 50. Rivers are 126. Waterfall is 29. Hills are 35, national parks 14, sanctuaries 44, and 11 tiger reserves available. The total number of flowering plants available, that is different number of species available, is 7,402. Non-flowering 1,814. Insects 6,000, different type of insects, birds, bees. There are 10 different type of bees available only in the Western Ghats. Then fishes, 288 number of fishes also available. So these are all panoramic view Western Ghats. There are all some important animals found in Western Ghats. Some snakes available, and these are all some orchids. Sorry, I don't have name of all these orchids now. Uh, so these are all different type of orchids. Orchids are special type of flowering plants, and you can see different type of orchids also there. So this is a very peculiar climate that we have to conserve, and even the UNESCO in the year about 2006 or something, they have made it into a notorious place, and they are protecting, even constructing of dams and even other human manipulations also. So now we have to conserve these areas that will impact our climate very drastically. So that is what I finally want to explain you. So with this, uh, actually, with the, for this opportunity, I thank one and all.